Good afternoon, classmates. Good afternoon, Ma'am Bao. So, the topic that I will be reporting for today is about utilitarianism. So, first, please get your book and turn it into page 163. So, let us first define what utilitarianism is. Utilitarianism is a philosophical view or theory about how we should evaluate a wide range of things that involves choices that people face. So basically, it is the idea that involves the process of how we should have assessment of the different things which our choices is involved. So in simple words, if the choice you have made would result to happiness or enjoyment to the greatest number of people, then it could be considered as morally right or morally correct. Another one, utilitarianism focuses on the person's pluses for compensating to the other person's minuses. So it means that people should sacrifice something in order to fulfill the needs of other people or what is lacking to other person. Some would consider it morally correct or more. Like for example, you saw 3 people drowning in the sea, 2 people on the right side and 1 on the left. Which would you choose to save? In the utilitarian principle, it is considered morally right if you would save the 2 person rather than the 1. Why? Because it maximizes the greatest number of people. Another one, utilitarianism is a theory which emphasizes ends over means. So here, regardless of what process you have made, as long as it promotes goodness to the greatest number of people and the outcome is good, it is considered as morally right. Another example here is your family is poor and as you are walking on the street, you saw 500 pesos. So here, in this case, it is considered morally right if you will get the 500 pesos to buy some needs of your family. In this case, you promote goodness to your family members. According to John Stewart, he defined utilitarianism as impracticably dry when the word utility precedes pleasure and as practicably voluptuous when the word pleasure precedes the word utility. So it is difficult if usefulness overpower pleasure, but it is much more attractive if pleasure overpower the usefulness. So basically, John Stewart said that you should not always look on the value itself, rather you should also consider enjoyment. An example here is being in social media. Even if you know that you have to review because you have your exams for tomorrow, you can, according to John Stewart, you cannot push yourself to review because your mind doesn't want that. Rather, you must choose having your pleasure, which is being in social media. Another one, Bentham's fundamental axiom, which underlies utilitarianism, was that all social morals and government legislation should aim for producing the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. So Bentham's believed that social morals and the government should also follow and practice having the utilitarian principle. Utilitarianism is normative not only for the individuals but also for the collectivity or larger group of people. So it is the accepted way, the accepted behavior that we must do, and it is not only for the benefit of one people, but it should maximize the greatest number of people. It should benefit a greater number of people. It must produce happiness to the maximum number of a certain group. So this theory is associated with hedonism, which only states that happiness is an intended pleasure and the absence of pain. We can only consider that we are experiencing happiness if we are having enjoyment and satisfaction, but we are not experiencing pain. Therefore, any actions which produce happiness or enjoyment are considered morally right or morally correct. But you must avoid giving pain, even if it is not your intention to cause harm, if it is still considered morally wrong to cause harm. Like for example, hurting your parents for having failed grades, even if it is not your intention to hurt your parents and to have failed grades, it is still considered morally wrong because you produced or you provided pain for your parents. So in simple words, if the choice you have made would result to happiness or enjoyment to the greatest number of people, then it could be considered as morally right or morally correct. Yeah. Utilitarianism focuses on the person's process while compensating on the person's mindsets. So it means that people should sacrifice something in order to fulfill the needs of other people or to provide what is lacking to others. Even though some would consider it as it is not right anymore, but in the utilitarian principle, it must be the right thing to do, and it is considered as morally right or morally correct. So I have here an example. The first one is, you attempt to help an elderly man to get across the street so he get across safely. The conclusion is, the act was a good act. The second one, you attempt to help an elderly man across the street. You stumble as you go, he is knocked into the path of a car and is hurt. The conclusion is, the act was a bad act. So the difference is that in the first situation, you have made the decision, which is to help the elderly man, and you made a right action. You helped him to get across safely. On the second example, as you stumble as you go, you caused harm, which is he is knocked into the path of a car and is hurt. So basically, if you cause harm, that would be considered as morally wrong. But if the action you have made would cause goodness only, then it will be considered as morally right. So even though if it is not your intention to hurt or to cause pain, it would still be considered as morally wrong. So to summarize, an action is morally right if it produces goodness, and if it would cause harm, even if it is not your intention to do it, it is still considered as morally wrong. And so here is the utilitarian principle. Act to promote the greatest good or greatest happiness for the greatest number. So the greater the beneficiaries of your decision and the greater number of people who would experience happiness, then it will be considered as morally right. As simple as that. So we have two kinds of utilitarianism. The act utilitarianism and the rule utilitarianism. So let's first discuss the act utilitarianism. Act utilitarianism is the most natural ideal of the utilitarian ideal, which states that the principle of utility is applied directly to every particular or alternative act in a situation or choice. So we are not considering the rules in having decisions. As long as it promotes goodness to the greatest number of people, it will be considered as morally right or morally correct. Action is determined by its usefulness to most number of the people. In act utilitarianism, rules are not important so as duty. Like for example, stealing money to provide the needs of your family. So regardless of the process, which is stealing, even though we can consider stealing as a crime, in utilitarian principle, in act utilitarianism, as long as the outcome is good, which is it could provide goodness, wherein you can provide the needs of your family through stealing, it is considered morally right, even though the process is wrong. So act utilitarians acknowledge that it may be useful to have moral rules that are rules of thumb or okay. If it is okay, or if the action is okay to the people, it could be considered as morally right. So we have here the Bintam Sidoni calculus, which will serve as our guide in the guide in the utilitarian principle in choosing the good thing to do. We have here the price: purity, remoteness, richness, intensity, certainty, extent, and duration. We will give an example later. Purity is about how free from pain a decision is. Remoteness is how near a decision is. Richness is to what extent will it lead to other pleasure. Intensity is about how powerful is it. Certainty is about how likely it is to result in pleasure. Extent is how many people does it affect. And duration is how long will it last. So, in page 166, we have here the example. A sick old woman to be euthanized to have no longer financial burden. Before considering or before doing this action, we must have to consider the price or the bintang sido ni calculus. How free from pain it is. It is too much painful if you will become euthanized. If it will be cost goodness to you. Like that. Remoteness, how near is it? Is it accessible for you to have euthanasia? Richness, to what extent will it lead to other pleasures? If it will lead other pleasures to other people, your loved ones. Next one is the intensity. How powerful is it? Is it powerful? Is it effective if you will choose to be euthanized so that you can have no longer financial burden? How likely is it to result in pleasure if that decision will really result for you to have pleasure? Next one is extent. How many people does it affect? If it will affect yourself, the other people around you who will suffer for that situation, because they will be the one who will suffer for the financial burden that you are suffering right now. And the duration, how long will it last? So, how long the pleasure will last? Oh, you may say that the pleasure is you will not experience any more financial burden anymore, but then there are your family members who will be the one who suffer for your financial burden. Then the last one is the rule utilitarianism. Maximizes utility only by setting up a moral code that contains rules where the principle of utility is used to decide or evaluate the validity of the rules of conduct and is not applied directly to individual actions. So here, rules are being conducted or set up for us to have guide in decision making. And those rules would only provide goodness to all. The correctness of an action is determined by the correctness of its rules. If correct rule is followed, the greatest good is achieved. So meaning, you must follow the rules so that you may promote goodness. So like for example, a judge is sending a murderer to a prison. The judge say that the convict will not commit any more violent crimes and wants to have his freedom because it is old and probably ill. The question is, should the judge let the convict go? So if the judge would consider the rule utilitarianism, he would follow the rule or the law, which is to let the convict or the murderer to be in prison because that is considered as morally right or correct. And lastly, for us to know the difference between the act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism, here is the diagram presented. So there are the differences between the act and rule utilitarianism. The act utilitarianism, action produces greatest good for the greatest number of people, wherein rule utilitarianism, the moral correctness of an action depends on the correctness of the rules that allow it to achieve the greatest good. The act utilitarianism, it is alright to break the rules as long as it brings a greater good. Action produces greater good for the greatest number of people. But in rule utilitarianism, even if a rule cannot bring a greater good, breaking it will not be either. So that is the difference between the act and rule utilitarianism. That would be all. Thank you.